Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good and the pursuit of the adventure of life. I am Rafe, and it is going to be a great show. We've been waiting months, if not years, to get to this topic, and people have requested this topic from us, and we are here now and prepared to discuss it. It is me tonight with Harry. Harry, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm also very excited about this. I know we've been talking about it for a while, teasing it for a while, but we're here, so that's good. And I think this will definitely encapsulate the definition of the adventure of life.
Yes, it is. This is one of the great adventures. But before we get to that, I have to thank the listeners. Without you guys, we would not be here doing these things. And we are a global top 10% podcast because of you guys. If you are new to the podcast, thank you for coming. We appreciate you being here. And hey, listen to this episode, listen to some previous ones, tell a friend to listen, and you'll get a free episode. And hit the subscribe button, leave us a smiley star, a like, a banana pudding, whatever the things are. Leave us a 5-star review. That'll be a great thing. Harry, today's topic is the adventure or the misadventure of the 28 men aboard the Endurance, the story of Earnest Shackleton's incredible voyage back to where he started.
We're coming full circle. I like that you used misadventure because it reminds me of Apollo 13, right? But just, a couple decades before. I think misadventure and then recovering from that misadventure to 100% is a great endeavor and a great human achievement in and of itself.
Yeah, and there could be, before we get started here on this, there are people that can say, well, a lot of other people did other heroic things. Yeah, they did. And here's one that got written down and the story got told, and it has become legendary for its understanding of how to deal with adversity and how to endure. So let's call this episode something like Bufnagle the Podcast Book Club Edition, as opposed to Book Report Edition.
Sure.
Right? So the goal is the discussion of the book and the story, and we'll go through the general story of it as well. And this will be a multi-part episode because there's no way we can do this justice in 30 minutes. So Earnest Shackleton, British guy, sailor, explorer around the turn of the century, around 1900. And back then, people were doing exciting things like going to places where they had never been before. Like, oh, I got an idea. Let's go to the North Pole. I got an idea. Let's go to the heart of Africa and walk across it. Here's an idea. Let's go to Antarctica and let's see what's down there.
You've got the kids for a couple months. I'll be right back.
That's right. Yeah. So let's raise money. We'll just this is like the end of the Victorian age, right? The end of Belle Epoque, as we have talked about numerous times. This is a grand and glorious age where man was believing that he could do anything if he just set his mind to it. They did not have rockets, so they didn't go to the moon yet, but it's the same spirit that drove the space age. And Shackleton decided that one of the last great adventures was to walk across Antarctica. Because
what else is there to do?
What else is there left? Harry, I'm thirsty. I could use a smoothie.
Yeah, you know what? I love smoothies too. In fact, I know what you should get.
Tell me.
If you love smoothies, I completely recommend the BlendJet 2. It's portable, so you can blend up a smoothie at work, a protein shake at the gym, or even a margarita on the beach. It's small enough to fit in a cup holder, but powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients like ice and frozen fruit with ease. BlendJet 2 is whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the whole house. It lasts for 15 plus blends and recharges itself quickly via USB-C. And best of all, BlendJet 2 cleans itself. Just blend water with a drop of soap, and you are good to go. In fact, they got tons of colors, a whole bunch of options to choose from. In fact, I'm a classy guy. I like the black, but they've got a whole bunch of other patterns out there for the ladies in your life.
So, Harry, what are you waiting for? Mother's Day is coming up. Go to blendjet.com and grab yours today, and be sure to use the promo code Bufnagle to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. No other portable blender on the market comes close to the quality, power, and innovation of BlendJet 2. They guarantee you will love it or your money back. Blend anytime, anywhere with BlendJet 2 portable blender. Go to blendjet.com and use the code Bufnagle to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. Shop today and get the best deal ever. So people had been to the South Pole, but they'd raced there, taken a reading, and then zipped on back. And, I was a little kid. I always imagined there should be like a pole there at the South Pole, but there's nothing there. You just have to prove that you were there.
Yeah, if you look really carefully, the pole is there, and then you can look up, and there's like this ring that goes northern, and then it connects to the top, and we just live on a giant globe.
That's right. That's where the globe is held up with that pole, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole thing's kind of tilted. So you have to be careful when you're down there. You don't fall off. They decided they were going to, I guess, is it transect? Is that the right word for going across Antarctica? Traverse is probably the right word. And they were going to go from east to west. And this seemed to me like the weirdest statement to make is you're going to go east to west across Antarctica, because when you're down there, if you're going to go to the pole, you're going to go south. And when you leave the pole, and then you're going to go north, right? So, but you can, if you take the prime meridian, and we've discussed this on occasion, if you take that prime meridian and you extend it all the way down to the pole and then back around the other side, the stuff of Antarctica that is on the eastern hemisphere, that's called East Antarctica. And the part that's on the west side of that line is West Antarctica. And you're not gonna. He didn't pick the longest distance. You kind of want to get as close to the pole as you can before you have to start walking. So his plan was to start at the, I guess I'll call it the southernmost tip of the Weddell Sea. All right. So if you remember, sometimes I think of in a grand sense, Antarctica is just kind of a circular continent. Kind of, give or take, very roughly speaking.
Yep.
But it has this like a stem on it, right? It has this
big like a little tail. Yep.
Like a tail, like a peninsula. Okay, and that peninsula goes up. It kind of points at the bottom part of South America. So if you were a swimmer, Craig, if you're a swimmer, and you wanted to go from the tip of South, the shortest distance swimming would be to go from the tip of South America to the tip of that peninsula, which is called the what peninsula, Harry? Do you remember this? I know that tip of
towards South Georgia, right?
Well, see, that's it kind of swings around, but the tip of the peninsula is called Graham Land, and it's the Lassiter Coast. I mean, there's a number of everything has a million different names, but there's that little tail, that little tip. That little distance is several hundred miles. I mean, that's a long distance going to go down there. But at the base of that peninsula on the right, which is the east, I guess, typically, if you have that peninsula up, that's the Weddell Sea, Weddell, and that is it's a sea, and it's interesting because the winds there are very swirly, and they tend to push anything that's in there tends to get rotated counterclockwise when you look at it from above. So this is going to come into play with his whole misadventure here. When you look at No, clockwise. You're right. I'm clockwise. An idiot. Right? Yep. Yeah, it's clockwise. I'm thinking too much polar coordinates. Yes, it's clockwise when viewed from above. Anything that's in there very slowly, very very slowly rotates clockwise in that.
It goes up the eastern side of that point, right? Up,
yep.
Rotates north on the west side, so clockwise up the Graham Land Peninsula,
right,
out towards Elephant Island and Clarence Island.
Right. So that's where he's going to start. He wants to get to the south tip of that thing. And then they're going to unload their stuff and their dogs, go down they're going to go from there down to the South Pole. And meanwhile, their buddies are going to go to the Ross Sea, which is, if you keep the Antarctica oriented the same way, the Ross Sea is kind of down at about, maybe the 6 or the 7, 8 o'clock position down there. And it's kind of an indentation in there. And they were going to march from there kind of toward the pole and leave. Here's an idea, Harry. We're going to leave you provisions there out on the Antarctic plain, and you guys can go pick them up as you're coming across so you don't get hungry. And to me, that was just like, right, what a plan. Okay, we're going to go from England. We're going to sail to Antarctica. We're going to make landfall at the Weddell Sea. We're going to walk to the South Pole. And then we're going to walk from the South Pole to the Ross Sea, picking up provisions that were left there by others. And we're going to catch a ride, go back to England, and we'll be heroes. I mean,
how hard could it be?
Yeah, what are you going to do with your summer, right? It got really bad for these guys. Okay, so now the book, this is book club. So the book is Endurance by Alfred Lansing. This was originally published in 1959. So this is an old book, but it's been published at least 49 different times. It's printed that many times. And this version that I'm holding right in my hand now was published in 2014 with an introduction by our friend Nathaniel Philbrick.
That's right.
And those of you who have been around for the Pilgrim episodes last autumn and winter, we read Nathaniel Philbrick's Mayflower book. And so it's the same guy, and he does a nice little introduction at the front of this thing. It's about 350 pages. So I don't know, a couple hour reading. You can crank through this. It is, Harry, what
it speeds up. Oh goodness. To someone out there who hadn't been reading a lot of, especially nonfiction,
Yep.
Recently, and having two kids to take care of, the first half was a little slow for me. I don't think I've ever read 200 pages of a book about guys who just sit on more or less an ice floe, right?
Yep.
Flat iceberg so quickly.
Yeah, it is. See, I'm out of words, Harry, to describe what these guys went through. And
well, I think we should let the listeners know first what it was like in Antarctica, and then we can tell them about how Shackleton got there.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a great story. And if you haven't read the book, you can read this book. We'll be okay if you stop the podcast, read the book, and then join us again for a discussion. But they leave. Okay. So that's the plan. All right. Go to Antarctica, sail down there, hop off the boat, march across, get another boat, and go home. They leave England the day that England declares war on Germany in World War I. And they get notice like a month before they were going to leave that the war had broken out, and they weren't sure what was going to happen. And they were on the ship that day trying to decide if they should go or not go. And war had been declared, and they got a notice from the person who was overseeing their expedition. They said, should we go or not? And he got a one-word telegram back, and it just said, proceed. So they got on the boat and they sailed from England. They left in August of 1914. They sailed south and reached Buenos Aires in late October of 1914. So that's 2.5, almost 3 months to get from England down to Buenos Aires. They pick up supplies and they talk about what they're going to be doing, and they make some other plans, and they sail south out of Buenos Aires towards South Georgia. And it turns out that when they were en route from Buenos Aires to South Georgia, they discover they no longer have 27 men on the boat. They now have 28 men on the boat.
That's right, because someone decided to be a castaway.
No, a stowaway.
Castaway.
They could have made him a castaway by leaving him anywhere along the way. So they picked this guy up, and there's a lot of discussion. And this was the part of the book that was the slowest for me, was going through who these people were. And I probably should have read this more diligently, but they picked, this guy. They advertise, you want to go on the adventure of a lifetime? Sign up here, low pay, risk of death, looks great on a resume, that sort of thing. And so they would advertise for these guys, and they'd interview them, and some of them got selected and other people got turned away. And they had 27 of these guys, and they picked up the 28th guy there in Buenos Aires.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though, because you mentioned, Shackleton will go out and interview these guys and say, I really like you, or I really hate you. And he was very blunt.
Yep.
Right. If you got along with Shackleton, you got picked up for the expedition. If you didn't get along with him, no such luck. You were just left to do whatever. And, I'm reading some quotes here. I think his captain was Worsley, who's probably one of my favorite characters in the story. He basically said, all right, you're engaged. We've met up. I'll let you know all the details as soon as possible. Take care.
That was it.
And it was it. He's a very soft. I don't want to say soft spoken, precise man.
Yeah, it was not loquacious, I guess is the right word.
Sure.
So he was very brief, but keep in mind, so that a lot of people, he was like, no, I don't like you, you're not coming. And if you're going to spend months walking, if you're going to walk across Antarctica with sled dogs, and you're going to camp every night on the middle of nowhere with the wind howling, and it's how cold there, Harry?
What? I think the warmest I ever got was maybe like 34 degrees in Antarctic summer, right? Because the ice was starting to melt in some places.
Right, yeah. So it's always cold. Sometimes it's so brutally cold that you're like, death is, you are right on the edge, right? You're always on the edge. You cannot afford to have any sort of interpersonal conflict. Everybody's got to be completely engaged. It's, there's no HR department on the ship. There's no grievance procedure. There is, you follow the rules or the whole group dies. And I think they all knew this sort of thing. And these were the kinds of men that go and that try to go to Antarctica.
That they go off on great adventures.
Yes, a great explorer, as Winnie the Pooh would say.
That's right.
So they go down to South Georgia Island, and you can find these things on a map. The book is great. There's 2 maps on the inside because they kind of track that tracks where they go. And I had one of them dog-eared because I kept going back to that map to try to remember where they were. They reached South Georgia Island on November 5th, and they reached the South Sandwich Island group on December 7th, which was great because it was lunchtime there at the South Sandwich Islands. Sorry. All right, so on December 7th, they're at the South Sandwich Islands. And now remember, the Weddell Sea holds ice, and the ice kind of, the wind blows it in this clockwise fashion. And they started sailing south in early December toward the far tip of the Weddell Sea. And they're starting to get really far down there. The South Georgia is like 60 degrees south, which is equivalent to the middle of Hudson Bay. So that's starting to get up north. Hudson Bay is pretty far north, and the equivalent of that is pretty far south. The south tip of the Weddell Sea is at 77 degrees south. So that's 10 degrees inside the Arctic Circle. And that's like land of the midnight sun, right? When it's summertime, and it's land of the midnight, well, the noon,
perpetual darkness.
Yeah, it's life in perpetual darkness when you are in the winter there, which would be the northern hemisphere summer. So they were way down there. So like equivalent of the top of Greenland, that sort of thing. Point Barrow, Alaska, for anybody who knows where that is, that's right along the top of Alaska. That's at 71 degrees north. So they were farther south than Point Barrow, Alaska is north when they were trying to get to the place where they're going. And so they're sailing down there, and they had heard when they were on South Georgia Island that the winter there was brutal, and the ice flows in the Weddell Sea, according to the whalers that were there, the ice flows were thicker than they had ever seen. These guys told them that, yeah, this is a bad set of ice. So the longer you can wait, the better. The longer you can wait toward South Hemisphere summer would be great. But they take off in early December and start sailing. And by January 24th, Harry, they are stuck. They are sailing, and the ice is too thick for them to continue to go. The ship that they are on is called the
Endurance.
The Endurance,
right? And it's a huge wooden ship. It was custom built, if I remember, for the expedition. It took years to build. The timber on it, I don't forget how thick it was for the hull, right? It was like 1.5 feet.
Yep. This is and heavy duty, like oak.
Right. And so this is a massive wooden ship.
114 feet long and a beam of 25 feet. This is a big ship, and it's got both a coal-fired furnace that runs the
engine.
The engine, and then it also has, you can put sails on it in case you wanted to save, you want it to be, wind power, right? That's the thing right now. So you can do that. So they get stuck there, and they spend time in January and February trying to free the ship so they can get down to the land so they can start their expedition.
Right. So they would look for openings in the ice flows. Right.
Right.
An ice flow being a very flat iceberg that you can kind of sit on top of. So the Antarctics get stuck. They're looking for cracks in the ice flows such that they can, disembark, pick apart the ice flow with like pickaxes and shovels and such,
and saws.
And try to ram the ship through these ice flows.
It's interesting to me because to get a picture of this, and I've never sailed through ice flows. I don't know. I've been on lakes in Wisconsin when they freeze up, and I've been out there when people go ice fishing, and I can imagine trying to, you can see what it takes to cut through that ice, but it's not 35 degrees below zero there. It's generally just a little bit freezy, and you have a little shack you get to sit in. This was a gigantic ship stuck in the ice, but the ice would move on occasion. It would slide and
it shifts with the wind and ocean currents and all these other types of things.
And they're stuck in that. And on occasion they would be up there in the mast and the crow's nest looking out, and they would say, "Oh, look, there's a crack has opened up, half a mile ahead of us. If we could just get to that crack of open water, we could sail." So they would all jump out of the ship, climb down onto the ice floe, and they would saw away and hack, and they'd make a little trough, and they would fire up the engines, and they'd ram the ship down the end and try to make headway toward the ice floe, or toward the open water through the ice floe. And they would spend a day or 2 days doing that, and
no success.
It would fail. To no avail. So they're burning coal, they're burning up their energy, they're using their morale, and they're not making any progress. And by the end of February, they are realizing that this is a useless endeavor. We are stuck. And at this point, you might be thinking, well, it's February. Spring's coming. No, it's not. It's February. Winter is coming.
That's right.
And things are really going to start getting bad. So it's late February, and Antarctic summer ends when?
February 24th.
February 24th. Yeah. So they are now moving into autumn, and their autumn is not filled with Antarctic football and beautiful, leaves, leaves changing color, right? Nope. Their autumn is just, it was cold and now it's going to get colder, but not as cold. Sunlight. Yeah. And the sun's going to go down, and the sun's going to set, I think in late May. It's going to set for them, and it's going to be nighttime forever. So they decide at this point, they are stuck in the ice in late February of 1915. And they are just, you know what? Hey guys, we're going to ride out the winter.
1915.
We're going to ride out the winter of 1915. The winter of the middle of 1915. We're going to ride that out here in the boat, stuck in the ice. So we need provisions.
Yeah, so that they more or less set up camp, right? So they kind of start taking things out of the ship, right? The ship is stuck in an ice floe. Therefore, they are also stuck on that same ice floe, and it's not going anywhere because it keeps on being frozen. Otherwise, it's just being taken by sea currents, right?
Yeah, it's rotating very slowly, and so much that they can't see relative to the ice how much they're moving. But when they take readings of the stars, they can calculate we're in a different position than we were last night.
Right, but they still have to survive the winter.
Right.
So what lives in Antarctica?
Penguins.
Penguins and more penguins?
And there's some marine mammals and plankton.
I'm not a fan of plankton.
Well, I just don't have the right teeth for plankton, I guess. So, but so that's what they get. They get penguins, and there are large marine mammals like walruses and sea leopards and seals.
Yep.
That's what they get. So they start picking up whatever they can find to eat. And here on page 44, Harry.
Yep.
By April 10th, the party had accumulated, this is 28 men, okay? By April 10th, the party had accumulated 5,000 pounds of meat and blubber. And I'm thinking to myself, where do you keep 5,000 pounds of meat and blubber? Do you know the answer? wherever you
No.
want. It's a whole, you're living in a freezer.
Yeah.
All right, so you keep it wherever you want. Shackleton calculated that this would last 90 days and would eliminate the need to dip into their supply of tinned and dried provisions until the middle of the Antarctic night, which was approaching very rapidly.
That'd be great and all if your ship survives.
If your ship survives. Yes, and it is...
Remember, the Endurance is being beaten up by the ice. It's being battered and bruised on a regular basis.
Yeah, these ice floes are scraping against it, and they are pushing hard. And I didn't understand what does this. There's a term they use in the book called pressure, and I always think, well, pressure is just pressure, right? But pressure is a special nautical term for the force generated by a moving ice flow when it runs up against another ice flow. And so if you get gales of wind that are pushing against these ice flows, they don't just, they're ice, but they're not completely slippery, right? The wind pushes these things.
Yep.
And if the wind is pushing across hundreds of miles of ice, yeah, I've seen this, Harry. I've seen this footage in some of like the Great Lakes and stuff like that, when ice forms up on them and the wind blows the ice pieces across the lakes. And it just rides up onto land, and it looks like nothing is driving it, but it's all driven by wind. These ice flows run into each other, and then they would bend and pitch. They would lift up, and sometimes the ship would get lifted up and then slammed back down,
like 20 or 30 feet, right?
Yes. And this is a 114-foot solid oak sailing vessel full of 28 men and 5,000 pounds of meat and blubber. And the pressure in the ice flows is lifting and moving this thing like it's a toothpick. And that is not good for the structural integrity of your watercraft.
No, and I think what we'll soon find out is that the men are living on the ice floe. It's really loud inside the ship, right? So no one's going to be sleeping inside the ship. They're sleeping outside because it's technically better living conditions. And they're slowly realizing, Shackleton is slowly realizing, that the ship is not going to be able to withstand the pressure.
Let us not forget, Harry, it's really cold. It's not just like an autumn, like, oh, it's a nice day for my LL Bean sweater. I mean, it is really cold there, and the wind is really blowing. And I was reading this. I read most of this in the middle of winter here in Indiana, which is like, my friends up there in Wisconsin and in Vancouver, you're going, ha, 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 winter in Wisconsin, winter in Indiana. Ha, ha. The wind blows a lot. And when it's 10 degrees outside and that wind is really howling, it feels really cold.
Yeah.
And these guys were living that was like the high point is when you got to go into the very noisy, creaking, ready to implode because an ice floe is pushing it from the outside. You get to live in that ship, and maybe the wind's not blowing, so it's only like 20 degrees below zero in there. These guys were living constantly at below freezing on the really good days in the summer, right about freezing, down to into the negatives so far that it doesn't matter if we're talking Celsius or Fahrenheit. That's how cold it was. And they were living in that and functioning and hunting seals and keeping the dog sled dogs alive. And they were
keeping the furnace lit, and their faces are just eating up ash.
There was there's a piece in there that talks about when they were, I forget where it is in the story, but they talk about how the wind would blow all the time. And if you've been in cold weather, your nose runs like crazy. And when your nose runs and the snot drips out of your nose, and they said it would form a little drip on the tip of their nose and then freeze there. So they'd have a little icicle on their nose. And if you bumped it, then the icicle would come off, but it would take off a little bit of skin. So these guys all suffered from this terrible skin removal.
Right, because that was the worst thing.
Well, but no, that's not the worst thing. But these are like the constant things that you're facing. Like they're constantly suffering bits of frostbite on their appendages. their faces are constantly frozen. Their skin is coming off their noses. It's cold all of the time. It's cold all of the time. And you're eating walrus meat and seal blubber and penguin
condensed milk.
And they get condensed milk. Oh, it's time for tea. And then they make tea every now and then. They would make tea. And I would take the dog out. I would take the dog out and I would say, oh, it's time to go. And I would walk out. And I was like, oh my, it's cold. And it would be like 25 degrees. And I'm like, this was a really good day for Shackleton.
Mm-hmm.
This was like the 25-degree day is a really good day for Shackleton.
That's right.
And it gave me this new perspective for how bad it can really get and how well you can endure it. And I think that's where we're going to end this episode today.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we'll leave people with, they're sitting on the ice floe. The Endurance is stuck. They're waiting out their time until they're waiting out the winter and the perpetual darkness. And we'll see how they survive that. And next time when we come back, we'll talk about how they survive the winter, because they do.
Yep.
Right? What happens to the Endurance.
Yep.
And what their next steps are.
And I'll give you a hint. It doesn't get any better.
No.
It doesn't get any better. So anyway,
I think they still sought the good, right? And that's what Shackleton's trying to do here.
Yeah, they are seeking the good, and they are seeking an adventure of life that is off the charts. So between now and then, get Shackleton's Incredible Voyage Endurance by Alfred Lansing with the introduction by Nathaniel Philbrick, and we will talk more about this next time. And until then, I want to remind you to seek the good, be the good, and spread the good, and enjoy the adventure of life.